This message is for somebody in particular. When I was doing the meditation prior to sitting down to make this recording, I could feel the episode being pressed upon my consciousness, the title of it. And I didn't quite get the full download, but I feel called to share some of my story. Perhaps you are going through the dark night of the soul. Or perhaps you are out of the dark night of the soul, but you're not recalibrated yet. You could be in the middle of an identity shift. Things are not quite working out as you would hope. Or you might feel that you're supposed to be further along than you are. It could be that you are in a transition window. These are periods of the ascension process where your life is undergoing this major upheaval. It is almost like a rebirth. And as a result, when you're going through the mile markers, you see one and you think it's perhaps your destination. And then you're remiss to find out that it falls apart too, or that things are not shaping up in a steady way that you would anticipate. It might even seem like you're jumping around from business idea to career prospects to relationships to identity crises. So when I started my spiritual awakening, somebody told me, and I can't even remember who it was. It seemed like one of those in passing things, a cliche that people will relay. But when you're in the middle of it, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't sit right. For some reason, it didn't with me. But somebody said, "Oh, you'll see. 5 years, you'll see." Indicating, I was like in year two, indicating that by the fifth year, you're going to look back and understand things a lot better. And it could be that somebody also told me that the fifth year is really when I would be starting a new life and embarking on this new identity. And it's hard to really comprehend that when you're in the middle of a big shift because everything seems monumental and your growth rate is so fast. You're changing so much on the inside. Your outside life might not look like it at first, but you just think to yourself, there's no way that this is going to drag on for 5 years because how could it? I'm making so much progress. What I've observed is it's true. There's something about embarking on this fifth year that the change that is solidified in me that I'd like to convey to you is so substantially different. Recently, I was looking back at an old social media profile and I was wondering who was still following me in because I hadn't posted on there in a really, really long time. And not that I was very consistent anyway back then because I've never been big into social media and look at me now. But so I was perusing and I noticed that there were some old faces that I hadn't checked in on in a while, like old friends. And I took a peek at their profiles and one of them in particular, who was a really close friend of mine way back when, I hadn't seen pictures of them in probably 10 years or so, even before my spiritual awakening journey really started. And I was scared. To be honest with you, I was actually frightened because they looked exactly the same, except 10 years older. Meaning, they literally looked like they were in the same life with the same people, new additions to the family. eating and drinking the same, probably still at the same career. I'm sure that they moved up. They were a very ambitious and successful person, so probably not in the same job position. They had lines on their face, but they were literally the same person. They smiled the same. And there was something truthfully so disturbing about it. Not about them, because they're a great person and the world benefits from their existence. They're like a really kind hearted, giving, generous person that does social good and has so much love and light. But what was disturbing about it is that it felt like night and day, because I remembered the person that I was when we were close, the person that attracted them to me. And I'm no longer that person. And I'm so different that I feel unrecognizable, but it feels like time has stood still for this person. And the reason it disturbed me is because it felt like for a moment I had this flash of this world is a simulation. And my friend, then, we were NPCs together. I'm no longer an NPC, but they're still an NPC. And I'm not saying that that's actually how it works, but that was the insight that I had. It's like, I'm really in a simulation. There's no possible way that this person hasn't changed unless we were NPCs and I stopped being an NPC. And they're a great NPC, but an unplayable character, for those of you who don't understand the video game reference, it's sort of in the spiritual awakening community. It's this understanding that there are people that are like placeholder people that come downloaded with a character build, and they don't deviate from that in this life unless they're scheduled to wake up, and not everybody is. So they stay the same. Fundamentally, they stay the same. And some people, like Dolores Cannon, call them background people. Other people call them filler people. It doesn't demean their existence. It means that they are not going to be awakening beyond their archetypal build that they incarnated with. And they have a position in society and a role that they're playing. And it's a very important role sometimes. So it's not meant to devalue their contributions, but it's like they're here for one purpose only, and they fulfill that purpose and then they die. What bothered me about it is that I didn't feel like I could reach out to them and we would have anything to talk about, nor that we would want to catch up, because it seemed like the way that they were socializing now was very different from how I would want to socialize. And it was this moment of recognition of my own awakening and this understanding that I have to leave people behind, that I think really disturbed me, because it reminded me of other people who were a little fresher in my reality experience that I can see that I'm outgrowing. And 5 years ago, I never would have thought I would have been here at this position in space and time. And some of these relationships I yearn for with such heartache and such conviction that we were supposed to move forward together. And the breakup of some of those was really hard on me, because I didn't gracefully accept the transition and the loss at that time. And I felt as though it was outside of my control. And some of those breakups I was angry about. And I really felt that there was some injustice. And looking back, I see it was a blessing in disguise. And I know it's so cliche when you hear this, when you're in the middle of it. It's like talking to myself back then and hearing, like, well, this is the best thing for you to take this relationship out of your life. Don't worry, don't worry. We know what we're doing. Trust the divine plan. I was so angry about that whole concept for a really long time. And now, looking back, I completely agree. And the wisdom that comes with retrospective examination, especially after year 5, when you're in the middle of a major transition, is unparalleled. And when you hear things like, oh, you'll understand in about 5 years, you'll look back and you'll see it differently. When you're in year 1 and 2, you don't believe it. It's just, because you haven't crested through the awakening enough to solidify your new identity. And what you realize is that there are people that are positioned at certain places at certain time points because that is the best thing, not only for them, but for everybody. There's somebody that helped me with my spiritual awakening that I really struggled with letting go of then. And it was a profound soul contract. And I felt this certainty that we would be in each other's lives for the remainder of this incarnation. And what I now realize is that they were meant to stay where they were at. And they're happy where they're at. And they're just working on their lessons, doing their life, doing their thing. And I've gone in a completely different direction. And I checked in on them recently, and we've had contact throughout the years, throughout the 5 years. And what I understand is that I tried to bring them along when it wasn't in anybody's best interest. It wasn't in theirs, and it wasn't in mine, and it wasn't in the other people who they would meet in their life. Because these karmic webs that we're associated with have connection points that impact other people. Sometimes there are families involved and children and bosses and employees. And it's not just about you. It's about the circle of influence that that person has. And sometimes, especially if we have any fear of going alone, like I did in the past, then we want to hold on to all of our close family and friends and sometimes drag them along with us, almost like a security blanket, because we don't want to embark on the journey into the unknown by ourselves. So sometimes we try to awaken people, and some of these people are resistant to it and don't appreciate these efforts because they're where they're supposed to be. They actually are. And when we are afraid of traversing by ourselves into the unknown, we can hold on to relationships that we've outgrown, that we know are no longer serving us or are mutually not compatible anymore. But we do so out of fear. And we sort of like hang around like a ghost. I remember being in my Dallas apartment feeling like something was wrong with me because I couldn't leave. It was a very peculiar feeling. I felt stuck. I told people about it in my close life, like, I need help moving. I need help, like getting my stuff out, because there was this perverse relationship with me and my apartment that symbolized something to me that I couldn't quite figure out. And I don't think it's worthwhile to go through the why of that, and because it's not really the point. I started this series at some point where I could feel that I needed to leave, but I didn't know where to go and I didn't know how to get there. And I just knew that I had to change something. I tried buying new clothes, experimenting with style and fashion, and nothing was really working. I tried launching projects and tried practicing creating content and coaching plans, and I just was spinning my wheels for a while, a year or two. And so I created this content series that I've never published called, I can't even remember what it was called. What was it called? It was a challenge to myself. Oh, 1 year to live. And I gave myself 1 year to completely change my life. And I took the first couple of videos in said apartment where I felt like I was haunting it. And I recorded myself talking about how hard it was to leave and how I needed to reboot my life. But I was stuck. I read poetry, I drove around, and then I leaned into the experience and I let it go. And I embarked on the journey into the unknown with some bumps along the way, but I found myself walking away from my life in a very abrupt and unexpected manner. And I stopped looking back. I actually stopped making those videos because my life changed so drastically. And I realized after a year, when I was living in Costa Rica, singing to the geckos at night and being serenaded by the jungle, furiously writing music and getting into psychedelics. And I realized that I was just at the beginning. I was just at the cusp of this beautiful transformation that a year was not going to do it. Now I have catapulted myself completely into a different existence. And what I can tell you is that transition window is really challenging for the mind, especially if you're used to having it all mapped out, having a plan. Where do I go next? Where do I go next? What am I going to do? When you're in the transition window, you can't do that because you don't know who you're going to be at the end of it. So any plan that you create most likely is going to get thrown out the window anyway. So all of that excess energy that you're spending worrying about it would be better spent fully embodying the present moment, leaning into the discomfort of ambiguity, of not knowing who you're turning into. I started going by a different name. I started dabbling in different careers and trying to hit on this thing called purpose. And I kept aiming my arrow and then shooting off into the wind, only to find that the wind would sort of blow me off target. And then where I would hit would be completely unexpected, but would be another level of adventure and excitement and growth and challenge. And what I realized is that when you're in the transition zone or the transitional window periods, it's actually better to be malleable, to be in touch with your higher self, but to not stress about it so much. I stressed so much in the beginning. I stressed about things that I didn't need to stress about. And when you really lean into the experience and you let go of the past and you stop trying to drag people along with you, what you'll find is that you fully go into the waters of rebirth. And that's this alchemization that you really can't predict. And it feels comfortable to predict everything and to put a box around it. Say, I'm going to be a leader. I'm going to be a healer. I'm going to be a coach. I'm going to be a this. I'm going to be a that. And all of those are just identity labels that give you comfort in feeling as though you know what you're doing. But you don't know what you're doing. And the process is, for a lot of people, very mysterious. So, for those of you that are going through this upheaval or the dark night of the soul, and you feel as though the wind is beating you up or taking you off course, or you don't know where you're going and you feel aimless and you feel uncomfortable about it, good. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. And stripping off the layers of the false self was a big part of my journey, because who I was in year 1 and 2 was still a conditioned response of who I had always been. And so the choices that I made, the lifestyle that I had created, the people that I surrounded myself with are very different than the choices I would make now. It's not that they were bad choices or good choices. They're different. Their energy is different. Their preferences are different. And I might still spend time with some of those people, like my family. But my identity is no longer intertwined in the same way with the relationships triggering me in the same ways. As we emerge into new existences, what I have found is that we're no longer frightened by the past. There's this period of time where you don't want to go back. For a lot of people, especially to challenging relationships, you don't want to go back because you don't want to re-experience the triggers, or you don't have the tools yet to feel confident that you can handle things in a different way. And so you avoid it, you sidestep it, or you just cut people off. There's this interesting story about Jesus of Nazareth saying that he couldn't go back to his hometown because there's this process during your transformation where you start to emerge as a different person, and people don't accept you at first until, I find, you complete your transformation and you start talking to the past differently and triggering people differently. And then, in my experience, they do accept you. Or you just continue to bifurcate paths, but there is no resistance anymore. It's just kind of like lost interest, lost the magnetic vibration. So I would say Jesus didn't complete his transformation. That's my personal opinion. That maybe he was still in like year 3 and he had these gifts and these abilities emerge, but his identity wasn't fully crystallized yet. Even though he was embarking on this new identity, he was still holding on to the carpenter identity. So there was friction when he returned, where people expected him to be a carpenter and not this majestic creature. And so that tension between the two halves of his existence created this energy that people would later say even he couldn't return home, suggesting that people on a major spiritual transformational journey, even when they're not Jesus's, can't go back to where their roots are. And I say that this is false for a lot of people. For some people, it probably could be. But when you keep going and you push through, you no longer fear or regret the past because it no longer defines you. So it's almost as though you're embarking on these old relationships with such a fresh new perspective that you have to rediscover who people are just as they rediscover you. So the things you talk about, the way you spend time with them changes. It's like they have to figure out who the new you is. And when people reject, I find that there's usually fear under there. And sometimes that fear is well placed. That's wisdom and hard lessons learned. And other times, it's done almost as this knee jerk assumption that you're returning back to the same relationship, to the same person, even though you've embarked on this incredible transformational journey. There's something in your mind that has fixed them in your simulated reality, perhaps, to be an NPC that is unchanging. And perhaps they are. But when we embark on journeys of the past with fresh eyes, it allows people the leniency to also change and to join you. And how would you ever know if you automatically forecast people as NPCs? So by keeping a fluidity in your expectations and a non-attachment, you allow yourself to discover the truth. And sometimes, as I mentioned before, people really don't change all that much. But sometimes they do. And I've seen miracles, actually. I've seen people that I never thought would be awake, come awake and alive, and be vibrating with an energy of consciousness that never existed in our dynamic before. It's beautiful when that happens. I have family members that are like that. I never expected that, but it's something that I'm looking forward to getting to know them as an awakened being of their own accord. The transitional window is a time that can be very challenging because you are likely facing forced loss. Things can be taken from you. Finances, people, relationships, jobs, places to live. And it can seem very uncertain. But if you lean into the transformation and you allow for miracles to unfold, your life can become a beautiful masterpiece.